A good compilation should act as a representative taster of an artist's career, their early days, their progression, and where they ultimately ended up. It needs to be a nostalgic summary for fans whilst also serving as a gateway for non-fans, encouraging them to explore the broader discography. And, to be fair, the Beatles' Red and Blue albums did this perfectly. But the 2023 remixed versions came with some strange additions and some glaring omissions that need to be addressed. Hello, and welcome to Applejams, your Beatles and solo Beatles hangout. I'm so glad to see you here, so glad you could come. I have one little baby request, and that is, if you would, please me by smashing a like on this video and subscribing if you haven't already. That would really help me if you can. By the way, if you're just here to see my versions of the Red and Blue albums, then please do feel free to skip ahead to the timecode you can see here. But if you're here for the whole story, then please do stick around. I feel like that really helps explain the choices. So let's start with a little bit of a personal insight into what the Red and Blue albums mean to me. Without a shadow of a doubt, the Red and Blue albums will have been my first introduction to the Beatles when I was younger. So I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and in my parents' car we had a tape deck on which you were pretty much guaranteed to hear either Queen's Greatest Hits 1, which is also a fabulous compilation album by the way, or one of the Red or Blue albums. I think there would have been a bit of Elton John as well, maybe some Dire Straits, some Beach Boys, but the thing is they'd fly in and out, whereas Queen and the Beatles were pretty much always there, ever present in the car. So I was pretty intensely exposed to them from a young age. I remember being a particular fan of the Beatlemania era stuff, you know, things like She Loves You and Can't Buy Me Love. I've always been a fan of singing. So singing along to things from the Red album in particular was always something that I liked to do in those early days. Now, there's plenty more to my Beatles story that I won't go into now. I'm sure I can save that for another video. Suffice to say, I can't emphasise enough just how important these albums were to me in getting me started on my Beatle journey. Starting with Love Me Do, the very first Beatles single, and ending with The Long and Winding Road. The original Red and Blue tracklist skimmed the cream off every single Beatles album, creating a truly career-spanning representation of the Beatles' journey. Every UK single is included, and every album is represented on the tracklist, some more than others. It was curated under the oversight of Alan Klein, the Beatles' business manager at the time, who insisted that every single track should be an original. So no covers, not even the very successful Twist and Shout. I think this was a good idea and the right call to make. It kept the emphasis on the Beatles' phenomenal catalogue of self-written hits and just proves that their success was completely of their own making. Another aspect of the compilations that I think Klein got right was the idea to split the tracks into two very clear distinct eras, the 1962 to 66 era and the 1967 to 1970 era. I think that these time periods make a lot of sense. So with the former, you're getting the Beatlemania era and their rise to stardom, getting quite, progressively experimental and more sophisticated. And then the switch over is the Sgt. Pepper point, with the explosion of psychedelia, and the Blue album focusing more on their Beatles in the studio kind of aspect of things, focusing on them as recording artists. Plus, and I'm not sure if this was Alan Klein's decision, but I'm sure he will have had a hand in it, the idea to use the two images that they have, one from Please Please Me and then the other one from the aborted Get Back project, was simply a genius idea to illustrate these two eras. I remember looking at these two images when I was a kid and just marveling at how similar they were, and I didn't know the history then, so I was thinking things like, were these photos taken on the same day? Did they get different people in? Are they actually different people? Did they cut their hair between shots? The Red and Blue albums went on to be phenomenal successes, and I'm sure that they will have ignited the fandom of many a Beatles fan sat in the back of their parents' car. Now in 2023, alongside the release of the last Beatles song, Now and Then, the Red and Blue albums were re-released, having been remixed by Giles Martin, utilising the MAL machine learning technology developed by Peter Jackson's Wingnut Films to demix the original tracks, leading to all new stereo mixes, and those are the ones that I have in front of me. So MAL is crucial for the ability to remix some of the earlier albums in particular, which would often feature multiple instruments on the same tracks, which really stifles the possibilities from a remixing project. In fact, Please Please Me and With the Beatles were actually recorded on just 2-track machines, so the remixing options will have been drastically limited. Many of the 2023 remixes had actually already been heard on either the One remix project from 2015 or indeed the 1+ version of the same project, or from their respective Super Deluxe editions for the 50th anniversaries, which started with Sgt. Pepper and thus far has got us from Sgt. Pepper, the White Album, Abbey Road, Let It Be, and the latest being Revolver. But the Red Album from 2023 features 30 brand new remixes of Beatles classics that we've never heard before. So this is definitely the one that's of most interest to Beatles fans like me, who are interested in hearing what MAL can do for some of those earlier tracks, having been put to such great use on Revolver. As well as remixing the tracks, a significant number of tracks, 21 in fact, across the 2 albums, were added to the track listings, increasing the number of songs and therefore the runtime significantly, going from 2 3/4 hours to nearly 4 hours. This gives us an exciting opportunity to look at the differences between the 2 versions, and I've done a spreadsheet and some charts to show the differences in song distributions between the versions. I did say it was exciting, didn't I? So what's changed between them, and which albums have been better represented both before and after? Let's look at the song distribution and the originating source for both of the versions. If we look at the original versions, we can see that Rubber Soul in particular is very well represented, making up 23% of the Red Album. By comparison, Revolver has only 2 tracks, and Beatles for Sale and With the Beatles just 1 each. In fact, Rubber Soul contributes as many tracks as Beatles for Sale, With the Beatles, Revolver and Please Please Me combined. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong. Rubber Soul is a fantastic album, and I'd argue that its songs lend itself more to a best-of compilation than maybe Revolver's do in terms of mass market appeal. But I do think that balance can be redressed, as indeed it will. So stay tuned. The Blue Album, as you can see, is pretty evenly spread across the late records, so Sgt. Pepper has 4 tracks, Abbey Road has 4 tracks, Let It Be has 4 tracks. The White Album only gets 3, which seems strange for such a huge double album, but it actually tracks with the music itself. It's rougher, more experimental, often darker than the mass market Beatles image the compilations were built around. And then Magical Mystery Tour with 5 tracks represented totally makes sense as well. It was always a strange mishmash of film soundtrack songs, singles and B-sides anyway. Now let's see how these distributions change with the 2023 re-release, and this is where things get really interesting. You can see that Revolver and the White Album have had their representation increased significantly, now matching the tally for Rubber Soul, which has also increased by 1. That means that both Rubber Soul and Revolver have half of their tracks represented on Red and Blue. Madness! Most of the other records have had more modest increases, except for poor old Beatles for Sale, which is sat down there at the bottom with just 1 song represented, which of course is 8 days a week. Now we can argue the toss about what should or shouldn't be included on a Beatles Red or Blue compilation. Everyone's going to have their own opinion. For me, I think they got it pretty much spot on the first time round. But what I would say about them adding so much extra material is now they just seem somewhat bloated. The original track lists felt so much more like the essential Beatles. I mean, even then we're talking about 2 double albums, but that leaves so much more still to explore on the wider discography. The contribution from Revolver in particular balloons from 2 songs to 7. Now, Revolver is my favourite Beatles album, It's my favourite album, full stop. I'm not saying that these songs don't deserve to be on a best of compilation by this band, but I do think that they could have redressed the admittedly poor representation for Revolver on the original records without going quite so overboard. And that goes for the other editions too. I don't disagree with the quality of them, the vast majority of what they added. I mean, this is still the Beatles, for goodness sake, but I just think it makes sense that for a collection like this, you do better to be disciplined rather than overwhelming, leaving the listener satisfied whilst also sparking an interest to explore the wider catalogue. I do feel like both the quantity of the tracks and the runtime was almost perfect the first time round. I've promised to fix it, and fix it I shall. I don't disagree with a lot of what's been added, I just think that the bloat has got to go. So I've set myself a couple of rules. One is that no single album should have 50% of its songs represented. So that means that Rubber Soul and Revolver need to be addressed. Two is that the total runtime should not exceed 3 hours. I did think about keeping the runtime similar to the original Red and Blue runtimes, but realistically I do think that there is room to expand them a little bit without going overboard. So I stuck to 3 hours. It's fairly arbitrary, but it gives me something to work with, but still means that I have to be fairly restrictive with myself and not go crazy. But that does mean that with only 20 minutes of additional runtime to add to the originals, and if I'm going to make additions, that might mean that some original tracks have to go. I'm pretty biased towards the original collections, I'm not going to lie. I do genuinely think they got it right the first time, so tinkering with those original songs could be painful, but rules are rules. Before we dive in, just remember, I'm not erasing these tracks from history. What I'm doing is I'm building a different version of Red and Blue with a more casual listener in mind. I'm doing this for the 5 to 10 year old Applejammer to be sat in the back of their parents' car. This is just my opinion, so please, if you disagree, tell me what I got wrong in the comments, and whilst you're there, please do give me a like and or subscribe if you like what you see. Remember, you can't like me too much. I have loads more of these kind of like what if style videos that I've got planned. I just love thinking about this stuff and having opinions and hearing other people's opinions. It's just the joy of this for me is to engage with you beautiful people and share our mutual love for this exceptional band. So without further ado, here is the Applejams definitive Red and Blue album tracklists. So we start with Love Me Do and Please Please Me on the Red album. No changes so far. And then we get to I Saw Her Standing There. And what I'm going to say about this is I'm going to reluctantly keep it. So I love it as an album opener to Please Please Me, and I love the impact that it has there. As a younger listener, I genuinely do remember the first time I played this record and I heard Paul's 1, 2, 3, 4, and it sent shivers down my spine. It still does every now and then. But yeah, I think it does deserve to be on a best of, so I'm keeping I Saw Her Standing There. I'm also going to keep Twist and Shout. Now, I said before, I do think that Alan Klein got the policy of no covers right. But with Twist and Shout, I think you've just got to argue that they made it their own. Like, that version of Twist and Shout is just streets ahead of the Isley Brothers version. It's so important in their early career story as well, so I think Twist and Shout has to stay. Now, I'm not going to lie, from Me to You of that early period, it's not one of my favourite songs, and I did think about binning it off for the sake of runtime, but I don't think I can. It's their first UK singles chart #1 after all, so it's got a real historical significance. I think it stays on the grounds of common sense more than taste, if I'm being honest. Now, She Loves You stays, but is it me, or is there something a bit off about the 2023 remix? It sounds, compared to the others, it sounds very unclear, distorted and strange. So I'd swap it out for either the 2009 stereo or the 2009 mono mix. I Want to Hold Your Hand stays, of course. Now here's the first bin, and this might be controversial, but if you're not going to include Rain, then you can't include This Boy. Now, this version of This Boy is wonderful, and I'm so glad that we have it. It really shows off the separation technology well. There's so much air and space in the mix now. You really feel like you can hear the individual voices, and yet they still merge together so beautifully. It's a fantastic record. I just think that in the Battle of the B-sides, there's no argument that Rain deserves its spot on this track list more than this boy does. All My Lovin' stays, but Roll Over Beethoven and You Really Got a Hold on Me get binned off on account of being covers. They're great covers, don't get me wrong, but I just don't think that the Beatles made them their own in the same way that they did for Twist and Shout. Can't Buy Me Love stays, but what on earth is You Can't Do That doing on this album? I mean, that's not a best of track as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, from a modern perspective, the theme of an overbearing and controlling relationship doesn't sit well. It's a bizarre choice. We'll keep the next lot. So that's A Hard Day's Night and I Love Her, 8 Days a Week and I Feel Fine. Now I'm going to make an addition here because I think Beatles for Sale needs more than one song. The Beatles are evolving at this point, and John in particular is becoming more comfortable at showing his kind of like more vulnerable side, which leads to increasingly more personal songs. And that's why I'm going to include I'm a Loser from Beatles for Sale at this point. It's a favourite of mine from this album. Ideally, I'd include more if I had more runtime to work with. I think it's an underrated album. Now I'm going to keep all of the Help songs, so that's Ticket to Ride, Yesterday, Help, You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, and I'll include the singles We Can Work It Out and Day Tripper. Now Rubber Soul needs addressing, as I've said. That needs taken back down to below 7 songs. The problem is that the addition that they've made, If I Needed Someone, I don't disagree with. Like, it's a great song on that album. It's one of my favourite Beatles songs, full stop, let alone just on Rubber Soul. And it helps to give George more representation as a songwriter, so it's good from that point of view. It definitely deserves its place. But I've made my rules, and I've got to stick to them. And of what remains, it's between Girl and Michelle for one to get rid of. And I think it's going to have to be Michelle that's the one to go. It hurts, this one, because it's such a lovely song. But rules are rules. So, with that in mind, Drive My Car, Norwegian Wood, Nowhere Man, In My Life, and Girl all keep their place. Michelle, unfortunately, goes. Paperback Writer stays, and I'll also add Rain in at this point. With regards to Revolver, we'll keep Eleanor Rigby and Yellow Submarine, but we still need to reduce Revolver down as well. And as I said, I do think that they went a bit mad with Revolver. So we'll keep Taxman, but we'll get rid of Got to Get You Into My Life and I'm Only Sleeping. Here, There and Everywhere, however, stays. Here, There and Everywhere is one of the most beautiful love songs I've ever heard and definitely one of McCartney's best. And that's saying something considering it's a McCartney love song. As for Tomorrow Never Knows, as great as this is as an album closer, and we all should know as it closes off Revolver, I think that that's where it belongs, to be honest. It's a bit too out there for a best-of compilation for a more casual audience, so I'm going to leave that off. Moving on to the Blue album, and we'll keep Strawberry Fields Forever, Penny Lane, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, with a little help from my friends, and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Within You Without You, as much as I love it, belongs on Sgt. Pepper. I'll keep A Day in the Life and All You Need Is Love. Now I'm going to keep I Am the Walrus, but just to address the controversy with the remix, when the 2023 remixes came out, there was a lot of talk about how I Am the Walrus was remixed such that the sound effects in the run out were much more prominent. I don't mind it. I never really have a problem with having alternative versions because we still have the original versions if we want to listen to those. I do, however, think that with the best of, you should be aiming for authenticity as much as possible. So I think I'd probably swap that version out for either the 2009 mono or stereo remaster. I'll keep Hello Goodbye, The Fool on the Hill, Magical Mystery Tour, Lady Madonna, Hey Jude, Revolution, and Back in the USSR. I'm going to keep Dear Prudence. That's one of my favourite songs from the White Album. And what I like about this mix is that we have it clean of the fade out of Back in the USSR. So that's really nice to have. I'm going to keep While My Guitar Gently Weeps, but with regret, I'm going to get rid of Obla Di Obla Da. This one hurt as well. I've got really fond memories of listening to this in the back of the car as a kid and singing along. Still do. But I've got to make concessions for the runtime, so this has got to go, unfortunately. And I'm going to also get rid of Glass Onion. This always seemed like a strange addition to me. It's never particularly struck me as a song with mass market appeal. It's White Album through and through. It's a little creepy and sinister, and I just feel like that's where it belongs. I'm also going to leave off Blackbird. Now, again, Blackbird is one of my favourite songs, but I like that it sits on the White Album, waiting to be discovered like a hidden gem. You can use a song like Blackbird to gauge how much of a Beatles fan someone is. If they say they like the Beatles and they ain't heard Blackbird, they ain't heard nothing yet. On the flip side of that, a song like Hey Bulldog deserves to have a wider audience than just being buried on the Yellow Submarine, so it keeps its place on my Blue album. I'm going to keep Get Back, Don't Let Me Down, and The Ballad of John and Yoko. The Ballad of John and Yoko isn't one of my favourites, but it is a single, so I'm going to keep that. I'd like to keep Old Brown Shoe, but for runtime, I'm going to get rid of it. And to be honest, the 2023 remix helped make my mind up with that as well. I mean, I know I could swap it out for another version, but there's something off about the 2023 remix. There are missing guitar licks, and I can only think that the reason for that is oversight, is mistakes, because I don't otherwise understand why you'd get rid of them. Listen to the 2009 stereo version and then listen to the 2023 remaster and you'll know what I mean. I'll keep all of the original tracks from Abbey Road, so that's Here Comes the Sun, Come Together, Something, and Octopus's Garden. But I'm going to keep off Oh Darling and I Want You, She's So Heavy. The latter, that's a strange choice for a mass market best of. I mean, this is the Beatles at their most experimental and immersive, but it's not their most accessible. I'll keep Let It Be and Across the Universe, but I'm going to bin off I Mean Mine. I find that another strange choice. I can only think that it was included to increase George's representation, and I'll be honest, I think George is quite fairly represented on the Red and Blue album, so I'm going to get rid of that one. I'm going to keep The Long and Winding Road, but as a little bit of a curveball, I'm going to swap it out for the Let It Be Naked version, which was released in the early 2000s. The version on there strips away a lot of Phil Spector's orchestration and choral work, and I just understand that it's closer to what McCartney originally envisioned that song to be like. I am aware that this kind of contradicts what I said earlier about Walrus and how it should be true to the original track, but it's my list, and I'll do what I want. And finally, I'll bin off Now and Then. I'm quite happy for Now and Then to be on there, but it'd have to be alongside Free as a Bird and Real Love, and I don't have the runtime for that. So I think Now and Then can exist as a separate entity on the anthology project alongside the other two. And when all is said and done, that leaves a collection clocking in at 2 hours, 58 minutes and 55 seconds. So I'm in by a minute and 5 seconds, with about an hour and 20 of that being the Red album and an hour and 40 being the Blue album. Now let's check out those track source distributions. And as you can see, the distribution of tracks from source albums is a lot more consistent with my version, with most albums providing 4 tracks. Rubber Soul is still the best represented album, with the Beatles now the sole provider of 1 song, now that Beatles for Sale provides 2. That feels about right, because for me, With the Beatles is the weakest Beatles album. A Hard Day's Night is great, and I would have liked to have included I Should Have Known Better or If I Fell to bump the numbers up a bit. But to be honest, to me, Hard Day's Night is the best Beatlemania era album. And this area is very well represented through the other singles and the other albums on the rest of the Red album. So I think I'm okay with it. I'll just put those 2 charts side by side so you can see how the 2023 version compares to my curated version. And we go from 75 tracks and a runtime of 3 hours and 49 minutes to 60 tracks and a runtime of 2 hours and 59 minutes. So there you have it, Applejammers, an expanded and expertly curated version of the Red and Blue albums. It's clearly the best Beatles compilation imaginable. As if I weren't good enough to you already, please check out this link to check out my version of Red and Blue as a playlist on Spotify. But if you have alternative views, then please do let me hear them. Post your versions of Red and Blue in the comments below, and I'll be sure to check them out. I respond to every single comment. Or how about a single disc version? Can you keep your runtime down to half of what I've put together? Can the original 1 album be topped? Please do get in touch. And whilst you're at it, please drop a like on the video. If you've got this far, you must like it at least a little bit. So please do give me a like. It really does help out the channel. Otherwise, thanks for staying with me on this journey. I hope you enjoyed the charts, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.